There was one rifle in that shop the old woman would not sell, not for any price, not even to save the shop itself. She was 6 days from losing everything: the building, the benches, the tools, the 40 years she and her husband had poured into a corner lot in Montana. And a man had already offered her good money for that single engraved rifle behind the counter. Enough money to buy her another week, maybe 2. She told him no. She told everyone no. And nobody understood why, until a stranger walked in out of the wind and saw the same rifle, and went so still and so white that the old woman thought he was having a heart attack right there on her floor. October 1959, Big Timber, Montana. 80 miles east of Bozeman, where the crazy mountains turn the color of a bruise at dusk and the wind comes down off them and never once stops talking. It is 39 degrees inside the shop because she has stopped paying for heat. The whole place smells of gun oil and cold steel and wood stove ash gone dead. A single bulb burns over the workbench. Taped to the inside of the front window, facing out at a town that has already stopped coming in, is a yellow notice with a date on it. 6 days. Her name is Hattie Vance. She is 51 years old. She has run this shop alone since the morning 3 years ago, when she found her husband slumped over his own workbench, a half-engraved trigger guard still clamped in the vise. She has buried a husband and a son, both, and she has nothing left in this world but a building she's about to lose, and one rifle she will not let go of. The tall man in the sheepskin coat does not say a word. He drifts along the wall the way men do in gun shops, running his eyes over the racks. And then he stops. Dead. His eyes have landed on the rifle behind the counter, and every bit of color drains out of his face. A boy at the door whispers that the stranger looks like somebody off a picture show poster. Nobody recognizes him yet. Here is the story. To understand the rifle, you have to understand the 2 people who built their whole lives around the bench it sat above. Hattie was born Hattie Cole in 1908 in Livingston, Montana, a railroad town where the wind was so constant the trees grew sideways. Her father was a brakeman who lost 3 fingers to a coupler and never complained about it once. And from him, Hattie learned the thing that would later nearly destroy her: that you do not ask for help, you do not take charity, and you carry what you're given without a word. She met Errol Vance at a church social in 1928. He was a gunsmith's apprentice with steady hands and a quiet way, and he could take a rusted-out wreck of a rifle and bring it back so clean it looked like it had been made that morning. They married in 1929, 3 weeks before the whole country fell off a cliff, with $112 between them and no sense at all of what was coming. They opened the shop in Big Timber in 1931, in the teeth of the Depression, because Errol said a man would sell his bed before he sold the rifle that fed his family, and he was right. While other businesses on that street boarded up, the Vance gun shop survived. Barely. But it survived. And Errol Vance turned out to be more than a fixer of guns. He was an artist. He could engrave a receiver with a scene so fine you needed a glass to see the deer's eyes. Men drove 100 miles to have him build them something. His barrels shot truer than anything from a factory. In 3 counties, if you wanted the finest rifle a man's hands could make, you went to Errol Vance, and you waited your turn, and you considered it an honor. She kept his books. She kept his tools. She kept his benches exactly the way he liked them. They had one child, a boy, Daniel Vance, born in 1930, who grew up under that workbench handing his father tools and learning to shoot before he learned to write his name. Daniel was the joy of that shop. Daniel was the reason for all of it. Daniel was killed in Korea in November of 1951. He was 21. They sent home a flag and a box, and Errol Vance never engraved another scene with a child in it again. Not once, for the rest of his life. Errol died at his bench in 1956, a stroke, the half-finished work still in the vise. And Hattie was alone with the shop, the tools, the silence, and one note at the bank. In 1955, Errol had borrowed $2,400 for new equipment. Hattie had paid it down, faithfully, dollar by dollar, to $1,900. She was close. She thought she was safe. She was not safe, because the small local bank had sold Errol's note to a regional finance company. And the finance company did not know Errol Vance. The finance company knew only that the corner lot at 2nd and McLeod was worth a great deal more than $1,900 to a sporting goods chain that wanted to open a store there. The man who came to take the shop was named Dale Curtin, 47 years old, a field agent for the finance company, sent up from Billings with a clipboard, a tape measure, and an instruction to inventory the collateral before the seizure. He was not a cruel man. He was worse than cruel. He was efficient. He came in the afternoon, the day before the tall stranger, to do his walkthrough. He moved through the shop, touching things, writing numbers, the way a man appraises a horse he means to put down. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Vance, because you've earned honest." He didn't look up from the clipboard. Monday morning, the building and its contents transfer to the company. Everything in here gets liquidated to satisfy the note. I've seen your payment record. It's perfect. I want you to know that doesn't change anything, and I want you to know I'm sorry it doesn't. "My husband built this shop with his hands," Hattie said. "I have paid you every month for 4 years, and the company is grateful for it. But the note carries the building, and the buyer wants the building, and the buyer pays more than you owe. That's the whole of it." He finally looked at her, and there was something almost gentle in it, which made it worse. "I didn't write the note, Mrs. Vance. I'm just the man who reads it out loud. There's nobody here for you to be angry at. There's just the date." Then he offered her the kindness that wasn't one. "The chains said they'd keep you on. As a clerk, you'd work the counter of your own shop. A lot of folks in your spot have found that agreeable." Hattie said nothing. Curtin moved down the wall, ticking off rifles, and reached up toward the rack behind the counter, toward the engraved lever action, the one with the fine scrollwork along the receiver, the most beautiful gun in the shop. Hattie's hand came down on the barrel before his fingers touched it. "Not that one. Mrs. Vance, that one was never for sale." Her voice was flat and final. "Not to you, not to the chain, not to the man who came in last week waving cash. That one isn't even mine to sell." Curtin frowned and made a note. "If it's in the shop, it's collateral. Everything in the shop goes on the block Monday. I'm sorry, but I can't carve out exceptions. The list is the list." "It has a name engraved on it," Hattie said. "It was built for somebody. It's waited 8 years for him to come and get it, and I will not let it be sold to a stranger off a table for $40. "Then somebody should have come and gotten it," Curtin said, not unkindly, and wrote the rifle down on his list. Line 41, engraved, lever action, estimated value, $75. "Monday, Mrs. Vance." And he tipped his hat and left her standing there, with her hand still on the barrel of a rifle that belonged to a dead boy she had never met. She locked the door behind him. She turned off all the lights but the one over the bench, and she sat down in Errol's chair and accepted, finally, that on Monday it would all be gone. The shop, the tools, and the one thing she had sworn to keep safe. That was the night before the stranger came. Let me stop right here for 1 second. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your state in the comments. We read every single one, and I want to see how many of you are out there in the dark with Hattie Vance tonight. And if you have ever had to sell off or let go of something a person you loved made with their own 2 hands, a piece of furniture, a tool, a quilt, a ring, type the word keepsake in the comments. Type it for Hattie, because what that rifle is, and who it was built for, is the whole reason I couldn't put this story down. Don't you dare skip it. The next afternoon, the tall man in the sheepskin coat came in out of the wind, and he stopped dead in front of the rifle, and the color went out of his face. Hattie watched him from behind the counter. He stood there a long time, not moving, staring at the engraved receiver like it had spoken to him. "Ma'am," he finally said, and his voice was low and slow and seemed to come up from somewhere under the floor. "Would you take that rifle down? I'd like to hold it. It's not for sale. I didn't ask to buy it. I asked to hold it." Something in the way he said it made her reach up and lift the rifle off the rack and lay it across the counter on a felt cloth. The man took off his gloves before he touched it. She noticed that, the way you'd take off your hat in a church. And he picked it up and turned it to the light and read the engraving along the receiver. And then this enormous man, this stranger built like a barn door, had to put one hand flat on the counter to steady himself. Here is what was engraved on that rifle. 2 names and a date. For Corporal Thomas Hale, from a man who owes your father, 1944. "Where did you get this?" the man said. It wasn't really a question. It came out like something torn. So Hattie told him what she knew, that in 1944, a man had come to Errol, a man from out of state, somebody with money and a famous kind of face she couldn't place, and commissioned the finest rifle Errol Vance could build. A gift. The man wouldn't say much about himself, only that the rifle was for the son of his closest friend, a boy named Thomas Hale, who was shipping out, and that he wanted the boy to carry the best rifle a man could make, so that some piece of home went with him into the war. Errol built it over 6 months, the most beautiful thing he ever made. The man paid in full and asked Errol to engrave those words, and said he'd send word where to ship it. The word never came right away. The boy, Thomas Hale, went to the Pacific and came home alive in 1945, and the rifle went to him, and he carried it on hunts and loved it like a brother. And then Korea came in 1950, and Thomas Hale, by then a man with a family, went back into uniform, because that's what that family did. And here the stranger had to sit down on Hattie's stool, because he already knew the next part, and he could not bear to hear it. "He didn't come home from Korea," Hattie said softly. "The rifle came back to us instead, banged up bad. His widow sent it, said she couldn't look at it, but she couldn't throw it away either, and she'd heard the man who built it could fix anything. She asked Errol to make it whole again and hold it until somebody came who had the right to it. My Errol fixed it, and then he died before anyone ever came. So it sat behind that counter 8 years, waiting." She looked at the stranger. "Waiting, I always figured, for the man who had it built. Are you him?" The stranger nodded, and he could not speak for a moment. And then he told Hattie the thing that nearly put her on the floor. "Your boy," he said. "Daniel. When did he die?" "November of 1951, Korea." "Why?" "Thomas Hale died in November of 1951, in Korea." The stranger's jaw was working. "I made it my business after to learn how. They were in the same valley, same fight. Hale was a corporal trying to hold a position so the wounded could be carried out. And one of the men carrying the wounded, one of the men he died buying time for, was a private from Montana." He looked at her. "I don't have the proof in my pocket, but I've read both their records more times than I can count. Your boy and the boy this rifle was built for died on the same ground, in the same hour, on the same side of the same hill. Hale held the line. Your Daniel was one of the men that line was holding for." Hattie Vance put both hands over her mouth and made no sound at all. The two boys, the one the rifle was built for and the one she'd buried. They had died together, and neither family had ever known, and the rifle had been sitting in the dark between them for 8 years, like a thing waiting to tell its secret. Now, understand what this stranger could have done. He could have walked away clean. He had every reason to. He was due in Durango, Colorado, in 3 days, where a picture he'd spent 2 years getting financed was about to start shooting, and 100 people were drawing pay while they waited on him. He had a chartered plane sitting on the field in Billings, with the pilot reading a newspaper and the engines ready to warm. He had a stack of telegrams in his coat pocket, the third one that week, asking where in God's name he was. He had already learned what he'd come 1,000 miles to learn, where the rifle had ended up, and how the boy had died. He could have bought the rifle for the $75 on Curtin's list, walked out with it under his arm, and let Montana keep its troubles. But instead, he set the rifle down gently on the felt, and he looked at the yellow notice taped to the window, and he asked Hattie for a pen. "How much is the whole note?" "Everything, down to the last dime." $1,900, she said. "But mister, I didn't tell you this to—" "I know why you told me." He was already reaching into his coat. "Where's the man who's taking the shop? The finance man?" "He'll be back Monday." "Then we'll be waiting for him Monday." The stranger counted out cash onto the counter, bill by bill, slow and plain, until there was a stack that made Hattie's breath catch. Far more than $1,900. "This pays the note in full, and the fees, and whatever it costs to buy that note outright, so the chain never touches this building. We pay it in front of him, with witnesses, and we get it in writing." He folded her hand over the stack of bills. "And the rifle stays here," he said, "with you. You came all this way for it." "I came all this way to find out it had a brother." His voice dropped. "I'll ask you one thing, ma'am, just one. You keep this rifle. You finish whatever your Errol didn't, and you put it back together right. And then you teach a child to shoot with it, some kid in this county who needs it. Because the boy it was built for is gone, and your boy is gone. And the only way 2 men don't die for nothing is if something they touched keeps on living. Don't sell it. Don't lock it in a case. Use it. Pass it on. Have you ever held something in your hands and felt the weight of every person who held it before you? Have you ever kept a thing you could not bear to sell, even when you were down to your last dollar, because selling it would have felt like burying someone twice? Have you ever wondered how many objects in this world are quietly carrying a secret, waiting, sometimes for years, for the one person who can finally hear what they have to say? Some things aren't worth what they'll sell for. They're worth who they remember. And a rifle built by one grieving father, carried by one dead son, returned by one heartbroken widow, is not a thing you put a number on. It is a thing you keep alive. Now here is where you'd expect it to end. Stranger pays the note. Shop is saved. Roll credits. It almost didn't end that way. Because when Dale Curtin came back that Monday morning, and the stranger laid $1,900 on the counter and demanded the note marked paid, Curtin shook his head. "I can't take it." The whole shop went quiet. "The note's already been assigned," Curtin said, and for the first time, he looked like he hated his own job. Friday afternoon. The company sold the paper to the sporting goods chain directly, as part of the building deal. I don't hold it anymore. They do. And a buyer who wants the building isn't going to let you pay off the note and walk away with it. They'll just refuse the money and take the property Monday like the contract says. The cash does you no good here, mister. It's already out of my hands. I came up to do the final inventory, that's all. It was the trap closing. The thing had been arranged on paper so that even a man standing there with money couldn't stop it. And this is the moment the stranger showed what he was made of. He didn't argue with Curtin. He didn't shout. He asked one question. Who, by name, signed for the chain on Friday? Curtin told him. A regional manager out of Denver. The stranger went to the telephone on the wall, and he made calls for the better part of an hour, while Hattie stood frozen, and Curtin shifted his weight, and the clock ticked toward the hour the seizure was supposed to become final. He called a lawyer in Billings. He called a man he knew who sat on the board of the company that owned the chain. A man he'd met, years before, raising money for the war effort. A man who took his call the instant he heard the name. And the stranger explained, in that low, flat voice, exactly what story was about to walk out of a gun shop in Montana. That a chain store had refused cash from a war widow to seize the shop where a Gold Star mother kept the rifle of a soldier who died beside her own son. I don't imagine, the stranger said into the phone, that's a photograph your company wants in the papers. I don't imagine you want your name anywhere near it. Now, you can call your man in Denver, or I can call mine at the newspapers. Your choice. The chain released the note by noon. Curtin took the cash. His hands weren't quite steady. He marked the note, paid in full, in his own hand, and he signed it, and he slid the cancelled paper across the counter to Hattie. Then, he did the thing the company never told him to do. He looked at the engraved rifle on its felt cloth, and he looked at the old woman, and he said low, I've cleared out 11 of these this year, ma'am. I never lost a minute of sleep. I think I'll sleep better tonight than I have in a long while, knowing one went the other way. And he left, and he never came back. The shop was saved in a single morning. The thing that should have taken Hattie's whole life out from under her was undone before noon, with a telephone and a stack of cash, and a man who knew which name to say. And the stranger was already gone. He'd slipped out while Curtin was writing. Hattie ran to the door, the cancelled note in her hand, and saw him climbing into a car at the curb. She called out, Mister, at least tell me your name, so I know who to thank, so I know who to pray for. The stranger paused, one hand on the car door, and looked back at her across the cold Montana wind. I'm just a fellow who came in out of the wind, he said. You take care of that rifle, teach somebody to shoot it straight. That's all the thanks I need. And he was gone. A boy of about 12, standing outside with his bicycle, swore up and down for the rest of his life that he had watched John Wayne get into that car and drive east toward Billings. The grown-ups told him he'd seen a movie too recently and dreamed the rest. The boy knew what he saw. Nobody believed him. Hattie never told a soul who she thought it had been. She couldn't have proven it. She only had the cancelled note, the rifle, and the memory of a voice. That night, she sat at Errol's bench and wrote a letter, and she sealed it, and she placed it inside the rifle's own fitted wooden case, along with the cancelled note. On the front of the envelope she wrote, To whoever asks who saved the shop. And then she did the one thing the stranger had asked. She finished Errol's repair on the rifle. and she started teaching. Hattie Vance ran that gun shop for 19 more years. She did it alone, a widow in a man's trade, and she did it the way Errol would have. True barrels, fine work, fair prices, and a stool by the wood stove where any kid in the county could sit and learn. She paid off every cent she ever owed and never owed a cent again. And every Saturday morning, she took that engraved rifle down off the wall and taught a child to shoot it. Not to sell, not to lock away, to use, the way the stranger asked. She kept the rule he gave her, the rule she didn't fully understand. The boys don't die for nothing if something they touched keeps living. Pass it on. She died in 1981, at 73, in the room above the shop. The whole town came. They'd watched her nearly lose everything one Monday morning 22 years before, and they'd watched her become the steadiest hand in 3 counties. The shop passed to her late son's daughter. Yes, Daniel had left a child, a daughter born in 1951, just months before he died, a granddaughter Hattie had raised herself. Her name was June Vance, and she had grown up in that shop, and the first rifle she ever fired, at 7 years old, with Hattie's hands steadying her shoulders, was the engraved lever action with the 2 names on the receiver. June asked, every Saturday, who the names belonged to, and Hattie told her about Thomas Hale, the boy the rifle was built for, and about Daniel, the father June never knew, and how the 2 of them had died on the same hill on the same day, holding the line for each other. She did not tell June about the stranger. That part Hattie kept, the way her own father had taught her to carry things without a word. June Vance turned out to have a gift. She could shoot the way her grandfather Errol could engrave, like it was a thing she was born already knowing. By 16, she was beating grown men at the county matches. By 20, she was winning state. And in the years that followed, June Vance became one of the finest competitive marksmen Montana ever produced. A national champion, a woman who shot for her country on a world stage and stood on a podium with a medal around her neck while a band played. And here is what she did with it. She came home. She opened a shooting program for kids, and she made one rule that nobody could ever talk her out of. The children of fallen soldiers shot for free. Always. The sons and daughters of men who didn't come home learned to shoot straight on June Vance's range, at her expense, because she knew exactly what it was to grow up in the shadow of a name on a piece of metal. As for Dale Curtin, the finance man, he quit the company in 1961 and went to work selling insurance, and he died, unremarkable, in 1984. He cleared out no more widows. The finance company was swallowed by a bigger one and forgotten. The sporting goods chain that wanted the corner lot built its store 2 towns over, went bankrupt in 1977, and nobody who shopped there ever knew the name Vance. But the engraved rifle hung on the wall of that shop for 57 years, and the fitted case sat on the high shelf, and inside it, all that time, the cancelled note and the sealed letter waited, exactly where Hattie had left them. In 2016, June Vance, old herself by then, finally closing the family shop for good, took down the rifle's fitted case to move it, and she opened it, and she found the yellowed envelope she'd never once seen in 60 years of working in that building. To whoever asks who saved the shop. She opened it at Errol's old bench. In her grandmother's careful hand was the whole story. The yellow notice, Dale Curtin, the trap on Friday, the telephone, the stranger who came in out of the wind and paid a debt and asked nothing but that a child be taught to shoot with the rifle. And the part June had never known, that the 2 names on the receiver, Thomas Hale and her own father Daniel, belonged to 2 boys who had died together, and that the stranger had crossed 1,000 miles to find the rifle of one of them. And at the very bottom of the letter, Hattie had written the name she'd carried in silence for 22 years, the name of the man whose voice she never forgot. The man who saved the shop was John Wayne. Today, the engraved rifle does not hang in the Vance gun shop anymore. The shop is closed. The building is something else now. June Vance gave the rifle, along with the cancelled note and her grandmother's letter, to the Firearms Heritage Collection at a museum in Cody, Wyoming, where the finest rifles ever made by American hands are kept behind glass for the world to see. June set it in the case herself. She asked that it be turned so the engraving faced the morning window, so that when the sun came up over the Absarokas, the light would fall across the 2 names along the receiver and make them shine. The placard beneath the glass reads, "Engraved lever action rifle, built by Errol Vance, Montana, 1944. Commissioned as a gift for Corporal Thomas Hale, who carried it until his death in Korea in 1951, the same hour, on the same ground, as Private Daniel Vance, the gunsmith's son, who fell beside him. In 1959, the Vance gun shop was saved from foreclosure by a stranger who had once had this rifle built. He paid the family's debt in full, asked only that a child be taught to shoot with it, and refused to give his name. At the family's request, his name is left off this placard, the way he wanted it. That is all it says. No donor. The museum asked, more than once, and offered to engrave the name in brass beside the rifle. The family said no. When the curator asked June why, she said her grandmother had left instructions in the letter, and she meant to honor them. He came in out of the wind, June said, and he found out 2 boys he cared about died together. And instead of taking the only thing he came for, he gave it away and saved an old woman's whole world. And then he drove off before she could even thank him. A man like that doesn't want his name on a placard. He wanted somebody taught to shoot straight. She looked at the rifle in the glass. I taught 300 kids on that rifle. The children of dead soldiers shot it for free for 40 years. That's his name. That's the only name he wanted on it. We'll keep it the way he left it. So the rifle sits in the morning light, the 2 boys' names catching the sun, and the school children on their field trips lean in close to the glass to sound out Thomas Hale and Daniel Vance. And they ask the docent who the stranger was that saved the shop. And the answer beside the rifle is the same answer he gave at the door in the cold wind in 1959. Just a fellow who came in out of the wind. And it is enough. If this story reached you tonight, do me a favor. Pass it on. Share it with a hunter, with a veteran, with anyone who ever inherited something made by hands that are gone. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. There are more Duke stories coming every night at midnight. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.